There we go.
Recording in progress.
Recording in progress. I love it when it can just tell you out loud what it's doing. Hello, everyone. I am Sam, your pop archivist, back from probably a considerable hiatus at this point. But I am back, and I am joined by the lovely, the talented, the most piratical of guests on this show, Nemo Martin. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, I basically just tracked you down via DMs and was just like, "Hey, come on, please," and you were like, "All right." Which
Yeah,
the one benefit of Twitter while it still exists.
yeah, honestly, I do enjoy that people can reach you, and I was warned at some point to make that not happen, but so far everyone's been nice. But that I feel like saying that out loud is just begging for it to become bad.
Just inviting the experience of someone who's just like, I'm just gonna say whatever I want in this DM. You're like,
Yeah,
I regret
yeah.
my life choices now. Yeah, you're very kind. I always feel like when I do that in the DMs and I go on for like ever, where I'm just like, hey, here's my existence and reason for contacting you. I promise I'm not weird-ish.
Yeah. I mean, I've made my fair amount of DMs in the theatre. I mean, British London theatre is literally run on Twitter DMs at this point. So
There you go. Yep. I did this with Johnny Sims, who is a previous guest, and I was just kind of like, hey, I promise I'm just the right amount of weird, the normal amount of weird, but would you please
yeah,
come on the show?
yeah,
He was
yeah.
like, yeah, sure, why not? Um, and yeah, like so you are the creator and lead writer of the podcast Trice Forgotten, which is another Rusty Quill venture joint narrative podcast show. For those who might not be aware of what Trice Forgotten is, and it's I guess, would you call it an after show, below decks
Yeah,
ish?
yeah.
Could you briefly, or actually no, as much as you'd like to explain it, please go. Please go on.
Sure. You know, it's surprising. This is the first time I've been on air and had to describe the show. So I suddenly was filled with a panic where I was like, I know my show, right?
Exclusive. Nemo Martin, do they know?
um, Trice Forgotten is a podcast about a group of people who, in the 19th century, are the kind of people who would be usually attached to a great man, a great scientist, but have decided that, but I have decided that there is not going to be a great man scientist behind them. And so it's a group of scientists and sailors and people who are trying to get along on a ship. And it's kind of piratey and it's swashbuckling-y, and there is science because I love natural history. And there's food. It's a fishing podcast and it's a cooking podcast.
It's all the things.
It's all the things. It's everything that I want to see in the world put into one podcast. And then Below Decks is every other week we do a Below Decks, and so we talk about tangential or interesting things that have that we've researched in writing Trice Forgotten, or colleagues that I've worked with at the Natural History Museum in London, or other people who've worked on the show and who've done external research, or just things like that, which don't, they go into the show, but it's I feel like I just wanted to spotlight work that, you know, would be buried in a credits list.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sometimes people don't, I mean, because of the way the industry works, you hide how much hard work goes into it. And so it's sort of like bringing to the forefront the research, the historical parallels, the current parallels, and all of those kind of things.
So, as of the recording of this, I think the most recent Below Decks is the soundscaping. Where you talk to the sound editors, and I first of all, the sounds in the show are amazing, and so just like rich, and like I'm a sucker for the ocean, like in terms of like the sound of the ocean, because I live in Washington State. The ocean is not very far away from me. Like I can go and see the Pacific Ocean essentially on an afternoon if I really wanted to. Which is just the nature where I live. So like having those like seascapes is always just kind of, it's weirdly comforting to just hear that. And then so piracy is not a new subject for this show. I talked to David K. Barnes during one of these, and we talked about an episode of Wooden Overcoats that included the golden age of piracy. And oddly enough, piracy is weirdly enough tied up in my own life in terms of like, and it's really weird. It's a cute story, but it's a weird story. So if you'll indulge me.
100%.
So we have in Washington State in the Pacific Northwest a group of people called the Seafair Pirates. And they're groups of men and women who will dress up as pirates, and they will like be at big events like, you know, city, was it like town fairs, kind of stuff like that. Or Seattle does a seafair kind of weekend. And so they ride around on like a pirate ship that's kind of like a car. Type thing, like a float for parades. When I was a child, probably I think I was like five or six or something like that. My hometown of Renton has Renton River Days, and so we had the Seafair Pirates show up, and they're on a float in the parade and everything. And I was there in front of where the cars were driving by and everything. And so the pirates will get out of the boat and they'll, you know, run their swords on the pavement, and they'll just come up and they'll be like, you know, doing the typical like, "Arr," all that kind of stuff. So this one pirate comes up to me, again, 5 or 6, comes up, puts a ring on my finger. And then he's like, "Do you know what this means?" And I was just kind of like, "Nah." And he's like, "It means you're married to pirates." And he runs off.
Yeah. Sold to pirates at 6 years old.
Yep, there you go. I never got divorce papers, so I guess I'm technically still married to pirates in this weird kind of like.
Yes. That's an excellent basis for a story. I hope that someday it becomes a novel or a podcast or anything like that.
Feel free to use it in Trice Forgotten.
Excellent. TM. It's mine now.
I want story credit.
Yeah. Cut this out of the episode.
It's not in the episode at all. No one will know it exists until it shows up in the show. But yeah, it's just one of those like weird things that I just is so like burned into my brain and my memory of my life, where it's just like, and I always remember like dressing up as a pirate for Halloween because it was so easy to do.
Yeah.
So I mean, in lieu of that, when you were creating Trice Forgotten, I mean, did it, I believe in one of the other Below Decks or in an interview I might have heard you in, you said it wasn't always pirates. It started off as like you said, like a cooking, like a food-based show. Can you kind of talk about like how that switched from okay, food to pirates and revisionist history, basically?
Yeah. So some fireworks just started, so I'm going to close my windows.
Oh, okay.
Because I don't know if you can hear.
I can't really hear it. You're fine. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Well, so I was working at the Natural History Museum when I was first thinking about writing a show for Rusty Quill. They have a basic I'm not sure what their current status is, but an open submission policy. So you can basically pitch your show. And so I was formulating, or had already been formulating, ideas for a podcast for a long time, and was specifically thinking, okay, if I was to pitch to Rusty Quill, what would I try and pitch? And I was thinking about the colonial history of museums, because I was working in a museum, and I was thinking about colonial history for my PhD, and racism and how those things are tied together. And essentially, because I was still on contract, didn't really want to get in trouble for doing something like that was specifically like to do with fish or snails, because those are the two places that I have worked. And so it was kind of like, how can I use the basis of, you know, a podcast, sailing, archives, searching exploration genre, those kind of things, but how can I put a lens on it that's like not fish or snails? So
Right.
I don't,
This Nemo Martin sounds familiar. Maybe it's a different Nemo Martin. How many Nemo Martins could there be?
Yeah. There's like 3 of us. I have done search engine optimization of my name. Anyway,
a normal thing that everyone does.
So I was kind of thinking, okay, like one step removed from a museum is like using all these things as ingredients, because I love cooking, and I really love I just really love food, and I really love kind of, I think I mentioned in the first episode, we were thinking about I was thinking about authenticity and what does it mean to be authentically to something. And that was really towards food, because I was thinking about like fusion food restaurants. London, like many cities, is full of fusion food restaurants nowadays.
Yeah.
And so many conversations about what it really means to be a certain race, or like to belong to a certain culture. And as someone who's mixed race, often it feels like you are having to tie yourself to that culture and be like the knowledge producer of that culture in order to feel that you are, especially in the diaspora. And so when I was growing up, my mom didn't cook much Japanese food, but I wanted to learn more about Japanese food, and I really loved Japanese food before it was like really popular. And so I started learning from the internet how to cook Japanese food, and was cooking that for my mom, and she was like, oh, it tastes like Japanese food, that's really weird. And I was like, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Sure.
And so this idea of like finding your roots through food was really something that, especially in England as well, like at that time, like now London, you can't throw a stone without finding a Japanese restaurant or a fusion Japanese restaurant. But before, like, Japanese food wasn't popular, there were no like grocery stores where you could get Japanese ingredients or even Asian ingredients. There were quite a few Chinese superstores, but not exactly the same ingredients and stuff like that. And so like the idea, basically, I was conceptualizing Alestes, the main character of Trice Forgotten, as someone who isn't able to be in touch with her parents or her heritage or her cultural ethnic heritage. And so in exploring the world and finding ingredients, she could regain a sense of attachment to her culture. And so initially it was going to be a food podcast, and she was going to sail around, and she was going to like find recipes that her parents had left her, and she was going to use any ingredients and follow her parents' footsteps, essentially. And eventually, like, people were saying you shouldn't be afraid of like doing the museum thing. Because I think it was a little bit of a sidestep and like dampening down of things. And I basically was like, I know this museum stuff, and I think some of it is really hard to acknowledge, but we kind of have to, and there isn't really a lot that does. So
no, it's one of the things that attracted me to Trice Forgotten. I mean, not just the pirate angle of it, but I mean that's a big one. But because when you're trying to promote something like Trice Forgotten, it's like, how do you hook people in first? Like, well, it's pirates. Like the second part, well, it's a lot more than that. It's actually about culture. It's about telling the stories of the people who don't get their stories told. In museums and in archives. There was a Below Decks that was all about decolonizing the museum. And that one resonated with me the most, because in the archival community, we have been having these conversations like simultaneously. I was looking last night, just like, when was the first time like someone was really like proposing the decolonization of the archives in terms of like archival literature? And it's hard to find that because a lot of people are kind of skirting around the idea, and they're like, hey, maybe we should think about this. And then it takes a person of color to be like, no, come on, guys, we need to
Yeah.
like and a lot of it starts with like indigenous populations and Native American artifacts and everything.
Yeah, I
And
mean, like on that, like I mean, I've said in the podcast that like Natural History Museum workers are very guilty of being like, well, we're not the British Museum, so we're not the one that deals with like human culture. We're the ones that do with like natural world, and so it's less to do with like repatriation and all that kind of stuff. But like I the first time I was thinking about these things was because a First Nations Canadian person, they're mixed with Chinese, they came to the UK on a theatre project, and I was talking to them, like, you know, in the dressing room, and I mentioned that I worked at the Natural History Museum, and they essentially were like, do you know if any of my family's remains are there? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I can check for you.
Yeah.
But like I have never seen human remains at the Natural History Museum. And like, you know, I will try and do everything that I can in order to find out for you. And it turned out we don't or didn't. And that probably it would be in the British Museum if there were any. But yeah, it was like a shock to me because also like, you know, in Britain we detach ourselves so thoroughly from America, like the Americas and colonization, and everywhere, every place that we've colonized, that we can like sit and rest on our laurels as British people and be like, well, you know, it's not us that are in the museum, and there isn't a indigenous or First Nations community who can hold us accountable, really, apart from the ones in America. And, you know, we detach ourselves from that so far. Yeah, it's
yeah. I mean, even over here in the States, like there's still that this impetus to not acknowledge that we participated in colonialism. It's just like,
yeah,
guys, we were part of the system. I don't know how to break it to you, but it's there. It's baked into the institutions. I mean, the archival institution, or the practice of archiving as we know it, came out of the fall of the ancient regime in during the French Revolution. You know, it's like you can't say that we're not part of a system that we are so clearly part of. Like,
yeah, it's I just because we're not educated about it, and that is also why I wanted to do Trice Forgotten, as a way for people to like have a not softer way of educating themselves, because I don't think it's soft, but a that is the problem with science communication and history communication. It's that if you don't have a way in, as many people don't, because, you know, you're educated by the people who want you to be educated in a certain way, you're not going to learn about these things. And so, not that I think that all, you know, we have to learn about colonization through like entertaining pirate stories, because that's the only way kids will learn, because I don't think that's true at all. But I do think it's one way that people can start to think about it. And I think that's pretty much what my hope was, that people would start to be like, oh, I heard them mention that, I should go and like look up that thing a little bit further and like do some self-reflection, you know, as I've had to do a lot of
it's very because with Trice Forgotten, and then also with Below Decks kind of enhancing the story, like it so this is going to date me for a lot of people, but back in the day, young Ben Affleck, the actor, did a show called Voyage of the Mimi. And this show, which I believe was was a Canadian thing, or it might have been American produced or whatever. But the point of it was a narrative show that then had like these 5 to 10 minute like add-ons of young Ben Affleck going to an aquarium, or learning about the different aspects of like being on a ship or something like that. So it was like this edutainment kind of thing for science classes in America. So I got to watch young Ben Affleck acting his heart out at like the age of 12. And then watching him go to a museum and being like, hey guys, I'm here at an aquarium for, let's talk about whales for,
Yeah.
10 minutes. So there's an aspect of Trice Forgotten with Below Decks that reminds me of that in a good way, in a very good way.
Yeah, I mean, like, I genuinely, like, the only reason I started working at Natural History Museum is because I was watching a YouTube channel that's called Brain Scoop,
Mhm.
run by Emily Grassley, and she was like an artist who volunteered at her local museum, and she like did this like edutainment thing where she was like, she herself was learning how to do taxidermy at her local museum, and so
Oh.
she just recorded it and like put it on YouTube. And the Vlog Brothers, John and Hank Green, which I watched because I was a kid in the vlogging age,
Mhm.
like became attached to it, and that's how I found out about her. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's really cool that you don't have to be a scientist to work at a museum. You could be an artist, like you don't have to be trained. I really desperately wanted to be good at biology and chemistry and physics when I was a kid, but
Right.
just don't have the brain for it. And yeah,
I
so
sympathize with that, yes.
yep. So I was watching these like this edutainment show, and like she was making taxidermy fun and funny, and
Mhm.
I would recommend it if you like don't mind seeing dead bodies. I mean, it's quite a lot of like
Mm.
it's taxidermy, so
Yeah, it kind of goes with the territory.
yeah. But she was kind of making jokes and making memes, and it was like, oh, science isn't like that scary serious men like lecturing you about boring things. It's
Mhm.
like fun things about learning how the world works, and you can enjoy it at the same time.
So weird. I have that with his, yeah, like because my college education, my background is entirely like it's history, and the
Mm,
archives records management stuff is like a specialty of that. So for me, like growing up, I was always like, history is actually fun and interesting, guys. You don't understand.
mm,
And having people in my life who like whether they were like just majors in other subject matters or whatever, just being like, so Sam, how do you talk about history and not make it boring? And so it's like, well, you find something that you like and you know stuff about it, and then you tell people about it. And I always feel like people will ignore the passion that a person has for a subject in
mm,
lieu of like, but the subject matter is boring. Like, but not if you tell it in a way that makes it engaging. Like, that's the whole point. Like,
yeah.
history and archives, like history, like museums, it's all about storytelling, and the types of stories that we tell and whose story we tell. And like, that's
Mm.
fascinating and also frustrating and infuriating at the same time.
Yes, 100%. Like, yeah, I just similarly did my undergraduate in English and classics, and
Mm-hmm.
I did so badly in my first and second year because A, I didn't want to be there, and B,
Mm.
during exams and coursework, I was like, just, you know, you're taught to memorize things, even in really university,
Mm.
and kind of regurgitate stuff. And once it got to third year, I was like, I'm so sick of this. I'm going to take um I'm going to take my essays and my coursework, and I'm going to pretend like I am telling someone a story,
Mm.
because that's what I would do with my younger brother. Like, when he would ask me what I had like been studying at uni or whatever. He's only a year younger. I make it sound like he's like 7 or something, but and I would like be trying to tell him the story of the Odyssey or the Iliad, and
Mm.
like start telling it in a way where I was like, an oral storyteller,
Yeah.
which is what those things demand of you. And was like, passionately being like, oh my god, and then Agamemnon does this, and then like from around the corner, there he is with a steel chair, and like took that
And then here comes
attitude.
Achilles, and he's
Yeah,
ah!
yeah, and then I'd be like, and then Patroclus, and then they were gay, and like, took that attitude into my exams, and then suddenly did really well with my like
Mhm.
academic work as well. It, for the first time, felt like, oh my god, maybe I'm not like I'm not dumb. I
Yeah,
actually can understand this stuff, and like I'm, do
educational
well in it.
systems just they chew you up and spit you out, like unless you
Mm-hmm.
like there almost has to be some kind of like endurance test, fortitude, kind of like like, I mean, to put it in D&D terms, what's your constitution modifier? Can you, in
Yeah.
fact, withstand the educational system?
100%. Yeah. And so, like Trice Forgotten is me being like, hey guys, you should know about fish facts. Like it, and like, yeah, and I was telling someone at the pub the other day, like about the podcast, and I started it being like, well, did you know that Charles Darwin was taught taxidermy by a black man? And they were kind of like, oh, that's interesting, but like,
Yeah.
a little bit like, and then I was like, oh, and also there's pirates, and they were like, oh, great.
What?
So,
Pirates?
yeah, and so I started telling it from that aspect, and yeah, passion.
It's how you get the person in is sometimes the first step. It's the biggest step, but then it's like, how do you keep them? And thankfully with like Trice Forgotten, while the pirate part of it is amazing and I love it, because Alestes and Anne and Gammon are really interesting in terms of that aspect. When you get into like Siva and Nur and Inez, and how they all are just talking about food and fish, and because I think the latest episode was them like getting the coelacanth, and or maybe that was the one before, and like sea turtles and all of these like these little details that make up their characters and make them endearing and delightful. And I don't know, just hearing Siva just like go on and on and on is just like, I love you, you have to stop talking, but I love you.
Yes, 100%. Yes. Also recognizing in myself the like passion needs to have, you need to also be able to
it's like being able to know when to cut yourself off.
Yes.
And but it's also like that weird thing where you have a group of friends who also not tolerate but understand that part of you, where it's like they know that the more you go on, the more passionate you are about it. It's just a part and an aspect of you as well. And I think the group in Trice Forgotten are learning that about Siva, and they're encouraging it a little bit, but then they're like, okay, you have to stop now, please stop. Like Nur especially is just kind of like, Siva.
Yeah, like I love you enough to be able to say, like, because I think for me, so I am autistic, and I do appreciate when my friends are able to be like, hey, just so you know, I'm a bit tired, so like let's have some quiet time. And I'm like, oh, thank you for giving me a boundary. Like, right. I appreciate that so much. I could talk forever about something that I'm passionate about, but like always become aware like 20 minutes in that I'm like, oh god, I've started and I don't know how to stop. And so like the ability for someone, currently Alessis, Inez, they're not super nice to Siva about doing it, and that's a learning arc that they have to go on as well, but they're all learning what their boundaries are for the first time. They're all having to live with people that they don't know, and so they are having to build those boundaries together, and they're not going to get it first time because that's not something they've had to do before.
Perfect, they're just representations of like human beings, and that's so weird now. I don't know why
they're my perfect little meow meows, and nothing can affect them, and they're all good and perfect, and no criticism can be laid against them.
I'm gonna use like speak that I don't really do, like they're meow meows and blorbos, I believe.
Yes.
Is that what the children are saying these days nearby? I don't know.
Yes.
I'm online, but I'm not that online. I'm sorry.
I am sadly that online.
That's how I learned, though. I learned through osmosis, I guess, and just absorbing what other people kind of tell me via the internets. And then I make it look like I know things, because that's what I do. No, but I appreciate I think that's always the thing, especially like lately with narratives where people kind of expect people to, like characters to figure it out almost immediately. It's the era of the flawed protagonists, and which I appreciate so much, because I love a protagonist that actually has a character arc, because God forbid that they didn't know exactly what they wanted to do or who they are from like the moment you first meet them. Like you get very good impressions of who they are initially, like how they're starting, and you can kind of maybe see where they might go, but at the same time, it's an open book where you're just like, all right, Alestis could go this way, she could go that way. I mean, it's really like, it's about how organic the writing eventually becomes. It's like, Nemo might have an idea of where you want Alestis to go. You might have an idea of where Siva and Yor and Baker will end up. But also in the midst of the writing, that could change. And you're just like, oh no, no, it goes this way now.
Yeah, like it was my first time, well, not my first time being in a writer's room, but leading a writer's room. And it was really interesting because I am actually really bad at, I really want my protagonists to achieve happiness at the end, which, yeah, weird. But I mostly have to this point written plays, and so I write the endings, and so I know how they're going to go. And with this, it was really weird because we knew that we were going to be writing a season 1 and that we were planning a season 2 and 3, but not sure whether we would get a season 2 and 3. And the kind of like the question was, do we make Alestis and the other characters' arcs easy to end at season 1? And we eventually decided no. But if it had just been me, I think I would have taken the easy route and kind of made her a lot more one note because of that fear of like ending season 1 without complication. Like like that there are still complications with her. And I think what has been a good luxury in this, unlike writing a play, is that you can put so many more complicated plots in, and that the characters can change every episode in very meaningful ways. And yeah, it's been really fun because Morgan and Raph are very good at, who are the other 2 writers on the show, are very good at being like, but Nemo, what if? And I'm like, oh, that's evil. Yes, do it.
Are they just the 2 devils on your shoulder, or do you have 100%. One angel and a devil, or
2 devils all just the time?
2 devils. All right.
Yeah. I'm the one who's like, oh, but like, and they're like, no, make it worse. And I'm like, okay.
I'm gonna take you down the path that rocks.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. And it makes it complicated, and it makes it interesting to listen to, and it means that our characters aren't just perfect fluffy characters who all get along well, which I was really, really worried about because, like I say, I am terminally online, and I do see all of the discourse about like everything. Yeah. And I was like, God, I'm so terrified of people.
Like nuance is hard to get across. I mean, and you can do everything in your power to make the most nuanced character, and there's still going to be that one person that's just like, man, I wish that they liked each other more. And then you're going to focus on that the whole time. You're just going to be like, fuck.
Yeah. Yeah, but thankfully, like, I also write fan fiction, so there we go. If people want to make it more fluffy, you can go and write fan fiction, as I have done for many, many other TV shows where I'm like, why did you be so mean to my characters?
I've experienced, so I have written like Magnus Archives fan fiction and everything. Those who saw, I'm Lotus Flare, so if you're on AO3, you probably know, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, it's like writing that stuff. And I'm weirdly in a different boat on fan fiction sometimes, where I'm like, okay, I want some fluff, but I also want to be as true to the character as I possibly can. And that means they're kind of assholes sometimes. How do I write assholes? So it's this, I don't know if I'm a rare breed of fan fiction writer, because I know that they're the ones who do like this is only a bad ending, I'm letting you know that now.
I mean, I really enjoy like Groundhog Day fics, or fics like that, where the author is like, hey, just so you know, I'm going to be so evil to you. And the characters make the wrong decisions so many times that you're like, oh my God, please end the suffering.
Yeah, when does the cycle end? When did they learn the
Yeah.
lesson that breaks the chain?
Yeah. So I'm also there for I'm trying to be very careful as well because I do have an AO3. I'm not going to be reading any Trice Forgotten fics, but I'm
Mm,
like, I just like it's so novel to have the characters in your brain be written about as characters.
hmm
And so yeah, I've found it very entertaining to see um how people are interpreting them,
hmm
and thankfully so far nuance has like won the day.
Woo!
um woo,
Go nuance.
yeah,
Team nuance.
literally. Yeah, and I am hoping that, like, you know, with episodes 9 and 10 of season 1, that people are yeah,
Yeah, that's vague
continue
enough where you can be like,
the
some stuff's gonna go down. Yeah.
yeah.
It's always it's either the penultimate that really like sticks it, or it's the like the last 2 seconds of the last episode where you're just like, well, there's the stinger.
I'm so excited to talk to people about it. Oh my god. Because even some of the cast, they're like, you know, not they haven't read all of the scripts because they wanted to listen to it as it came out. And
Mm,
so there's maybe like 4 people, no, five or six people in the world who like know how it ends. And
hmm
of that, only 2 people that like live in the same near me enough that I can talk to them. And I've just
right.
been like, one day soon I'll be able to like say things. I'm so bad with like nearly saying spoilers all the time that yeah, I'm
Mm.
just like very looking forward to that.
Well, that makes me feel really good that I'm going to be either like fully devastated and love it, or fully like what the hell and love it. And because I feel like those are the only 2 ways that this pans out. Because it's not going to be like, oh, that was a nice clean wrap up of a series. Yeah, I feel like that's good. It never goes that way.
Yes.
Like as a comparison note, because if we're gonna stick with a pirate theme, like because I know that on Below Decks you have talked about like black sails, and also our flag means death, and everything. So I don't have as much experience with black sails. I know it exists. I'm aware of the culture around it and everything. But our flag means death is the one I resonated with the most, mostly because the the core of the story then hinges on whether or not Steed is actually considered a pirate, and the fact that a logbook is what saves his life essentially it just made me feel so good.
Yes, 100%. I'm like, oh yes, the nerdiest way to do piracy.
Yep, that's how it works for me. Like, to be like,
Yeah,
oh, a
100%.
logbook that's a narrative of Steed, how he wishes he had been a pirate, basically.
His fan fiction. Yes,
Yep.
yes, yes.
Like how Lucius basically just had to create the character of the gentleman pirate via Steed's like notes, and it's like, no, make it more like this and make it more like that. Like, I was like, yep, that's how history works. That's essentially the narrative function of history.
Yeah, I appreciated the like the take that they did on it, which is that you can't write historical fact because you're
Mm-hmm.
not there. And
Yeah.
the people who were writing things down weren't right, you know, what is truth.
Right. No. Okay, we're gonna get into postmodernism. Let's get into it.
Yep. But you know, like anything written down is like written down through somebody's uh, viewpoint,
Yeah.
and there's no one way to write down actual history because actual history is shared by many people of different sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did enjoy that part about Black Sails, where Taika Waititi was also talking about the fact that he went on the Wikipedia and was like, oh, none of this is true, so
Yeah.
whatever, I can do whatever the fuck I want. It's like,
Like,
yeah,
who really knows what Edward Teach looked like? Nobody. They're all dead. Like,
exactly. Yeah, so
well, even just kind of like because like the ideas that we have of pirates, which is a fascinating just like rabbit hole to go down, because it's based on like a couple of books that just were written and circulated for like a century or so. Because like even in Our Flag Means Death, they show that kind of that picture of Blackbeard that everyone kind of knows, essentially, like where he's got like the wild eyes and the hair and everything. And then you look at Taika Waititi and how his portrayal of Ed, and he's just like, man, that just bums me out that this is what they do. But it's so true. It's based off of a couple of books that just survived long enough to become, the text. And then also like everyone's idea of a pirate is also like in the voice that's based off of a 1950s Treasure Island movie. Like the pirate voice doesn't exist except in I actually wrote his name out, Robert Newman, who played Long John Silver. Like he made that voice, and then everyone was like, oh, that's just how pirates talk now, I guess.
And like Gilbert and Sullivan and the comic pirates, and I talked about this in an episode of Enthusiasm, which is another Rusty Quill podcast, and an episode about pirates, but talk about the pirate. She's most commonly known in the West as Madame Ching, like female Chinese pirate, also known as Xu Yang or Sekyong. We call her Sekyong in the friendship group that I'm with, so that's probably the name that I'll say. And it's really frustrating because when you try and research her, pretty much everything written down about her is written by these English people who were captured by her in the 19th century. And so their view of her is very much like, hey, we got kidnapped by this Chinese pirate, and here's all the things about that we know about her. So, how much of that is true? And another thing that, coming across in Trice Forgotten, where I was like, I want to write about these people that I know existed, but it's not like they fucking wrote down anything about their lives. And weren't really educated to a point or were allowed to have the time, money, paper to write things down about themselves, and those weren't archived, or if they were archived poorly, or buried deep in places.
The whole thing, like the archival practice of like the how it's so much tied into imperialism and colonial practices, just because it's like, well, it's all these dead rich white people that got their stories prioritized and canonized, basically. And then you have people of color, women of color, I mean, any group that isn't a rich white man, like just being like another Rusty Quill podcast, Outliers, to oddly enough, this is all circular. Like Rusty Quill seems to be doing a lot of tell Alex thank you.
Okay, yeah.
But it's these stories that are so much a part of the makeup of world history, of the history of every subject matter that you could possibly think of. But we always credit the white people for, somehow making it the most important thing, when you're like, no, there were so many other people involved that actually made the eureka moments happen, that were part and parcel of a system that like, brought them in, but then pushed them aside when they were no longer useful, and a lot of archives is also filled with the writings of people who understood writing for posterity. My focus as a graduate student and an undergrad was on the American Revolution and up to the ratification of our Constitution. And so you're reading these letters and notes from people who understood that what they were writing would maybe be viewed by people in the future. And so they are crafting their narrative even as they're writing, whatever they're writing. It's just Hamilton. I mean, it's just Hamilton.
Yeah, I was thinking about this recently because, like, I feel like I always have to caveat, it's actually not really happened so far on Below Decks, but like also Japanese imperialism was something that I was thinking about while writing Trice Forgotten. Another reason why some people didn't want to write their stories down is because they didn't want to write the fact that they were enslaved or indentured or about all of the trauma that like they went through, and they wanted to forget, and they didn't want their future ancestors to be attached to that kind of pain and suffering and humiliation. And I was thinking about it recently because I recently went to see a play about Korean comfort women, and how Japan basically as an imperial force is, it's not just white people. Asians have been doing it towards other Asians and towards other people for a really long time. I mean, and
you'd be hard pressed to not find a power that didn't do imperialism at some point.
yes. And but very recently, a lot of human rights lawyers have attempted to find evidence of Korean comfort women or sexual slaves, trafficked women rather than comfort women, but are finding it really hard to talk to people because they don't want to write their stories down, and they don't want to archive their names and their families attached to these things. And it's like, yeah, fair enough, like, but how do you make sure that there is accountability? Because red tape is so built into imperialism. There's a really good book, Slave in a Palanquin, and it talks about how red tape is built into, like, you invent forms so that you invent passports, and you invent borders, and you invent lines, and you invent checkboxes, and that keeps people in line, because you can't complain because, well, do you have the form? Well, I don't know how to read the form. Well, sorry, you can't.
Like, you can't access the information that you want. You can't do the thing you want because you don't know how to read in this system that encourages, people to have an education. And
and it's just like, so it's like built into the very foundations of our world.
Like, I have a book that I really loved. It's called The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu. And it's talking about the Middle Eastern practices of like the manuscripts that were basically through clan or tribal politics. The different groups would hide their literary works, their records, because when one group would take over another, the best way to erase their existence is get rid of the manuscripts, get rid of the writing. And so when European colonizers arrive, they see these groups that don't have any systems of writing because they've buried them to protect them from the other groups. And then they're like, well, clearly they're not educated over here, so we'll just treat them like they don't have an education. And it just, like, how one culture in trying to protect themselves then becomes consumed by another culture that makes an assumption about them without really delving into it. And how that gets perpetuated, over time. Whereas, like, the Islamic world was the height of culture and civilization for a very long time. And yet we still have to, like, repeatedly tell people that, you know what, how algebra, where the word algebra comes from.
The stars, navigation, philosophy, everything. It's just,
it's all, like, from here over there, that the Silk Road, transported over this, like, it's all connected, man.
The printing press, like, oh my God. Yeah.
It's like gunpowder. You know how we got gunpowder? But also, to speak to your point on people who don't want to be written down, don't want their stories told. In the archives, we have that terminology called the right to be forgotten. And it is often used with, like, data management, where it's like, you don't want people to be using your data. But it's also very much ingrained in, like, probably within the last, like, few decades of archival discourse, where it's like, people don't, like, if a person does not want to be remembered in the archives, they have every right to do that, because what are you archiving them for? Like, what is the purpose? Like, is it for their community, for their culture, or is it just because you want another, another story, another addition to a collection, and a person has a right to not be included in a collection if they choose to do so. But it also goes to your point about like, but then how do we prove that these things happened, because we are not an oral history culture. We are a paper format culture.
I do find it like really I've been seeing recently a lot of kids these days. Like genuinely, like I grew up on the internet, so but my dead name isn't. I'm really, really glad that I grew up with a dead name and then changed my name to Nemo, because like anything that was attached to me when I was like 9 or 10 years old using the internet is now not related to my, current.
To who you are now, yeah.
Exactly. And like, kids these days doing TikTok and stuff. What worries me the most is like trans kids filming themselves going through puberty and the beginning of their like transition. And I'm like, if I had started T maybe 2 years later, I would probably be the same kind of person. And, pictures of me do exist on the internet of me pre-transition or pre-starting hormones. And I'm just like, it's so dangerous.
Yeah.
Because you don't know like who is saving it, and you don't know this idea that like everything needs to go online all the time and that everything about you has to go online. Like it terrifies me, because I'm like, I very much like was doing that for a bit, and was like, oh God, I shouldn't be giving people everything about me.
Yeah, no, I mean, as someone who started with like when the internet was invented, I like there are pictures of me with my dad's old like Tandy computer, which precursor to like all the Microsoft and everything. So as someone who was like kind of skirted that line between the analog and the digital culture, I'm so glad that things that I did when I was 13 are not discoverable. And
and
yeah,
attached to
right,
your real full human name as well. And like
yeah,
what uniform, like school uniforms. I've seen loads of kids making TikToks in their school uniforms, and I'm like, I can find out what school you go to.
yeah.
That's really bad.
The fact that the internet, like especially when with things like when Twitter like really became in full use, and Facebook and all of these like sites, these social media platforms, this encouragement of it's basically a record keeping culture in a insidious way, because it's in some cases it's been helpful for people to prove their existence, to topple governments, in some cases to connect with people, but in other ways it is fully putting yourself out there, and anyone can do whatever they want with what you have given them. And it's like, how do you protect yourself, but also how do you justify your existence in this weird way that I don't think, especially from white people, we don't have to contend with, like at all. Like, I am afforded some more privilege just because I'm a white woman, but at the same time, it's like, as a woman, I also have to protect myself, like in a very real way. And I have, my DM is a trans woman, and like whenever I am like it's that white thing where like I don't want to insult my friends or re-traumatize them or anything like that. So like when I do stuff on Twitter, I'm just like, okay, if she sees this, am I going to hurt her? Like before, like in trying to support a thing and trying to emphasize a thing, like I don't want to hurt my friends. Like, and the internet is kind of created to perpetuate that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, 100%. And like, yeah, really couched in the language of like, you want to remember every moment that you spent with people, but it's actually data collection. It's all data collection. And it's like, it's not about you remembering times with your friend. And like, the problem is like, I have a really bad memory. Like it's just something I have to deal with. And so like, social media has been really good for me to like put things where I can see it and like to remember things that I really struggle with remembering. But my God, like I really am like, every time I download anything, turn up the security privacy stuff to 100 and stuff like that. It's
like 5 incognito windows within an incognito window. Like,
yeah.
how many levels of don't look at me can I possibly put into this?
Yeah, and even that, I know that all of my data is being streamed, so then I'm like, okay, whatever. But like, yeah, it's
I always with my friends when we do my girlfriends and I have like a semi-regular like Zoom call that we try to catch up because we're all like different areas of the world. And I'm always just like, to the NSA agent that's probably watching this, hey Bob, how's it going?
yeah.
They're all named Bob. I just collectively consider them Bob.
Yeah. I think that's a sound enough assumption.
Yeah. It's like even like Bobette, Bobbert, all y'all.
Yeah. The gender neutral Bob. Yeah,
the gender neutral. Yeah, it's so weird that the world we live in is now very much framed within this like, well, it's just going to happen this way now, isn't it? Like your data is just out there, you've consented to it for whatever, through whatever means, just by being online apparently at this point. And now we're just watching it all burn down. So that's cool.
Yay. I mean, like, and I just found it like Trice Forgotten is a food podcast. I
you should start every episode with that. Trice Forgotten is a food podcast.
Yeah. Any interview that I'm doing from now on is just going to be Trice Forgotten is a food podcast. I was thinking about like selfishly some of the things, which is like things like in Chinatown in London, there are some really, really good family owned and they used to be very like, I mean, you could walk in, buy a snack and leave kind of places. But then there was this TikTok trend of going to Chinatown and finding like non-touristy places. And then it was white teenagers mostly. And then popularizing those places with the like, did you know kind of style of TikToks. And very selfishly, it does mean that I now can't go to any of them because they're always popular all the time, which I'm like, I'm glad that they're making money. I'm sure that they enjoy the fact that, they're making billions more pounds than they used to.
Right.
But I am a bit like, do we have to archive everything? I like having quiet spaces in the world.
As an archivist, no, you don't. Yeah. Like that's one of those things like trying to explain to people. It's like, because even in my job, I mean, I'm considered more of a corporate archivist in a lot of ways, despite my efforts to try and get into more like academic, because then there's that whole stigma thing like, oh, you worked in a corporate archives, well, you couldn't possibly learn how an academic archives works. Like, yep, that's how that works. Yeah.
Okay.
It comes up, it's so frustrating because like I would like to be a participant in this institution, but unfortunately my ability to sort through data and metadata and catalog things from a corporate perspective is different from an academic, whatever. But
red tape forms, it's everywhere.
And oddly enough, one of my favorite tropes is like divine or eldritch bureaucracy. Like I love that. Like just taking the supernatural and making it so mundane is one of my favorite tropes. And I don't know if that just speaks to the archivist in me or if it's just like, I just like things like that made mundane because it's just funny to me.
The bit in Jupiter Ascending where they have to fill out loads of forms, really great. Also, it was filmed in my boss's office, so I fondly.
I think that was also the guest director. It was Terry Gilliam directed that whole sequence, and it shows because, like, yeah, that's Brazil. Like that's what that is, and so and that was the most entertaining part. It's like in Good Omens when you're like you're in heaven and it's like, well, we're keeping record of where your sword is, or you're in hell and like Supernatural. It's like, oh, it's like the DMV. Like
yes, yeah,
that makes sense to me. That's probably why I liked the villains more and like
Yeah.
Sam and Dean can die as many times as they want. I don't care. At this point, they might as well just show up in the first episode, die, and get it out of the way.
Dean, yes.
Yeah. Oh no, I have to lie about something. Okay, like
Sammy, I just don't think that I can do this anymore. So that was me holding a bottle of beer.
Like, can we get through this? Like, that's like a 2-episode arc by this point. All right, moving on. So it shows how much I've watched Supernatural, and yet missed so many seasons of it. Like I feel like I stopped it at season 10, and then there was like another 5, but I could probably tell you what still happens regardless.
Yeah. GIFs on Tumblr. That's yeah.
I think I watched the last episode just to see what would happen, and was just like, what? Okay, I'm gonna leave. That's all right. It's like the last episode of Lost, where you're like, okay, all right,
completed it, I guess.
Yeah, I guess they predicted it in episode 1 what was going on.
Yeah.
Spoilers for Supernatural, Lost, anything else that ended poorly and disappointed a lot of people.
God, I have such panic of like, oh God, I hope that's not Trice Forgotten. Oh God.
I feel like in conversation, I can safely say it's not going to happen that way.
Okay, great, thanks.
But if it does, I'll DM you and be like, Nemo,
you disappointed me.
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
And then just the like Cass going to super hell gif. Just
Yeah.
I'll
just send that to you. If it disappoints me in any way, shape, or form, I'll send you that particular gif, and you'll know exactly why.
Yeah, thanks. And then I can become a hermit, and then
there you go. I'm glad that I could give you that in these trying times.
Yeah, thanks. I do. Like I said, I love boundaries, and I love to be told. And
here's the boundary. I presented it thusly to you. No, I feel like you're going to be fine. Based on what I have listened to and what you have presented already, I feel confident, but that's just me. I mean, this is my
I'll blame the editors.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's the editors. If oddly enough, it was the voice actors' fault. It was them.
Yeah. Like all the people with no less agency than me. Yeah, it was all of them. Yeah,
it couldn't possibly do the writing. Yeah. The writing had nothing to do with it whatsoever.
Creator who I just I was like a ghostwriter basically.
I just showed up and they conscripted me into writing this. Alex Newell was just like, hey, you kid, come in here and write this podcast.
Exactly. I unzip myself and it is just Alex popping out.
Oh God. It's either Alex or like 3 gremlins in a suit.
Yeah, that's more likely, to be honest.
Also a favorite trope of mine, 3 blank in a trench coat.
Yes, I do feel like that quite often.
I feel bad that someone took that, I think, as an online handle at some point, like 3 something in a trench coat. You're like, damn it, I wanted that. But another thing I want to talk to you about, because I know that this is another passion of yours, is Les Misérables.
Yes.
Or try to do it more in a better French. I say Les Misérables.
That's better than mine. Yeah,
sure. I studied Spanish. I can't do a French accent. It's fine.
I also studied Spanish, not French.
I went to Spain one time and I tried so hard to utilize what little Spanish I retained.
I mean, probably better than all I remember, which is Donde está la biblioteca. So
yeah, pretty much. You're like, there's no library here that I want to go to. I can't even ask the most basic questions.
Why would I be wanting to go to a library if I'm on holiday? But
I mean, you never know. It might come up. There's going to be that one day that someone who learned Spanish is like, this is it. I can actually ask someone where the library is. I have fulfilled it, my quest. And some poor Spanish person is just going to be like, are you okay?
Yeah, in English. The library is that way.
Perfect English.
Oh, Europe. Oh,
because that's what you learn as an American, is that a lot of people already know some English and they can probably communicate with you. But no, I'm going to do this.
I mean, pretty much in England, the first thing you learn is every European country speaks better English than you do. So just don't even bother, really.
Don't. All I knew to do was when I was in France for a very brief period of time was to at least attempt French because that showed a sign of respect, and then just move on from there because there was no way I was going to be able to capitalize on that.
Yeah.
But back to Les Mis, because you did a podcast about Les Mis. Is it finished, or are you still doing it, or
still going? We've been doing it for 4 years, and we're over halfway now, but and we're picking up
through
speed.
The book, right?
Yes, we're going through the book and reading it for anyone who doesn't want to read it, and doing loads of like memes and jokes and attempting to contextualize things. And because I've read it many times because I'm writing my PhD about it, and my co-host Stevie has never read it or watched anything about it. So she's the one who's reading it, and occasionally it's really great, actually, because I get to watch someone's first time.
The first experience of Les Mis.
Exactly, yeah. And they love to attach themselves to old male characters, and I'm like, the mortality rate is...
I really like this Angelus guy. He seems cool. I'm sure everything will work out for him.
Yeah, they like to find every like nice old man character who is not reflected in the musical at all and is not an Eddie adaptation, and be like, this is my favorite character, and I'm like, yeah,
cool, it's fine, it works out, right? Yeah, they get an adaptation, it's fine. Yeah, my I remember. Okay. Because I saw the musical first before I saw anything. They did the what was it, the 10th or 15th anniversary, where it's like Colm Wilkinson, like the person everyone knows, is Jean Valjean, on PBS, or for my public access channel. And so I saw that probably when I was like 12, 13. So the music has been so ingrained into my brain, and that version, it's kind of like the first time you hear a music, like the voice cast for a Broadway show, like that's the version that's in your head all the time. This 10th anniversary one is the only one that I stack anything up to, and it's probably ruined everything for me.
It's a stunning one to, unfortunately, it's the best one. So.
It is, it really is. Because I watched the 25th anniversary with the Jonas Brother involved, and it hurt my soul to watch his cold, dead eyes try to sing Empty Chairs at Empty Tables. He did okay, but it was like, still was like, I don't care for this. And then, oddly enough, watching Lea Salonga, who played Eponine in the 10th anniversary, then play Fantine in the 25th. And there was just something about her performance that didn't work for me. And it was like she was shouting the whole time. And I don't know if that's just me, because I loved her as Eponine, and she's great she's the singing voice of Jasmine in Aladdin. So obviously she sings very, very well. But when she was Fantine, I was just like, I don't know why this doesn't work for me.
Honestly, like I used the 25th anniversary as a palate cleanser, because I listened. I basically have a rotation where I listen to all of them, and when I'm like, I need to but I'll listen to a lot of them like 2 or 3 times, maybe probably more than that, like on repeat. And then I'm like, okay, I need to like get that out of my head, so I'll listen to the 25th, but like it like washes over me, so I don't actually remember very much from the 25th anniversary. I think that's what it is for me. It's like a nothingness. It's like a sip of water before you go on to another good tasty one.
But then you have the movie where you're just like, how can I hurt myself more? I guess I'll watch Russell Crowe try to sing Stars. And
so I came to Les Mis in a very, very odd way, which is that before 2012, I had never watched a musical before. I very much was an anime kid, and I'd actually not watched a lot of Western TV shows and stuff. I grew up in the UK, but I just really liked anime when I was a kid, so I only watched anime. That's all I watched.
No,
And so
justify why you watched anime, Nemo, please.
yeah. And so but the friends I made in secondary school, they were big into musicals, and like when the 2012 film came out, they were like, oh, we have to go and see this in the cinema, and I was like,
Was that
okay,
the
well,
Liam Neeson? Was that the
no, the 20 like the Hollywood 2012 musical film
really? Okay.
with yeah, the Russell Crowe one.
Oh, was that 2012?
It was 2012.
That does no. No.
It's nearly been a decade. Yeah.
Damn
In
it.
like a month, it's been a decade since it came out.
Why does it feel like it was so recent? That's so
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. I'm
Okay.
so sorry. It was
Continue with
20...
your story while I contemplate mortality.
Yes, 100%. And I went and see it. I didn't know who Russell Crowe was. I didn't know who Hugh Jackman was. I didn't know who Anne Hathaway was. So I couldn't track their faces either, because I was so unused to seeing white people faces on screen. I was like, I didn't like recognize that Jean Valjean was Hugh Jackman later. Like, I didn't recognize that he was in disguise. I didn't remember who Javert was. I was like, who's this guy coming in? And like all of these things that were like happening to me, that I came out of it being like, oh my God, this is what you people like doing to yourselves? But I
assure you it is not.
And they were like, you know, crying about it, and they really liked it, my friends.
Oh.
And but I was like, how can I piss my friends off the most for like having brought me to see this? So I was like, oh, it'd be really funny if like people shipped Jean Valjean and Javert, not knowing anything about the fandom, went on AO3 and immediately found like, you know, the 1,000 fanfics, and was like, ha ha ha.
That sounds about right. Yep.
Yeah. I was like teasing my friends and being like, haha, look, like these two characters that you love, they're in love. And like eventually started making loads more reference, because I was reading the fics as well to like try and like make more barbed comments about them.
Right.
And then I was like, oh, someone mentioned something in the book, and I went to the library and like got the book, and so started reading that chapter. And then like now I'm doing my PhD on it. I'm like, wait,
tale as old as time.
Hold on. I was doing it for the meme, and then suddenly I am one of the experts on Les Mis.
I did it for the lulz, but now I'm actually the preeminent scholar on.
I'm like I am the only person to have talked about racism in the novel in like the 200 years of academia on Les Mis, and I'm like, wait,
seriously, what?
Yeah. That's why I'm doing my PhD. But
love to be a forerunner in academic scholarship now, don't you?
Yeah.
You overachiever.
I'm like, I just wanted to like piss off my friends. Now I know so much about musicals.
You know how like PhDs or dissertations always happen out of spite?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Yep, that's how this works. That's the internet for you.
Yeah, me reading one Valverde fic and then being like, well, I guess I'm in it for the long run. And yeah,
weirdly enough, like as much as like Javert's a cop, and we all understand that, but he's also like my favorite character in the musical because he gets the best songs. Like Stars is like, especially in the 10th anniversary, Philip Quast, the fact that I still know that it's Philip Quast singing Stars is something that will regularly pop into my head, like unprodded, just sitting there being like blah blah blah, like stars.
Yeah, the way he does it, stars.
Yeah. It's just like, I was explaining the song to someone back in the day when I used to do comic book journalism. We were doing a podcast about movies and comic books and all that, and it got on Les Mis because I think that's when the movie came out, and I was just like, freaking Russell Crowe and blah 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 blah, and was trying to explain like why the character Javert is so, you know, such a good like nuanced character in terms of how the musical presents him. It's been a very long time since I've read the book. I was probably like 14 and got to a point where I was like, Victor Hugo, if you could stop writing about a door for
Those are the best bits. I don't know what you're talking about.
I get it. Symbolism, blah, blah, blah. Like, but I'm 14 and I don't understand symbolism right now.
Yeah.
But to like, I was explaining to him, it's like the song Stars, as late in the game as it is his entire thesis. It's his reason for being. It is his song. And the fact that Russell Crowe so brutally murders it and that everyone thought this was a good idea hurts my soul on a level that I cannot explain to people sometimes.
Yeah, it's so symbolism as well. Like it's, yeah. I mean, if you track when in the novel, start like you can see the stars, or when it's an overcast day, it's really about God, because of course it is, because it's Victor Hugo.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's like everybody's like, is this about God? Probably.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. And how much Javert is like actually being responded to, and it's so like when he's like about to complete suicide and jump in the river in the novel, he can't see the stars anymore because he's about to do something that is against Catholicism.
God has abandoned him. He
yes,
can't
exactly. Yeah, and so it's like, oh, it's such a good, yeah. Oh, I have my criticisms of the musical, of course, but yeah. I do love Javert quite a lot. Yes, unfortunately, yes.
He's your problematic fave.
Yes, genuinely, every time a new piece of media comes out, I'm like, oh, the cop character. Oh, fuck. ACAB, but also Kim Kitsuragi in Disco Elysium.
I love you. Oh, why are you part of this system?
Yes, genuinely.
It's again like a moment that never ceases to give me goosebumps is the confrontation song. Again in the 10th anniversary part, because when Colm Wilkinson and Philip Quast are like so perfectly in sync and they say Javert at the same time with like the same intensity, I'm just like, oh God, I'm experiencing an emotion.
And I saw that and was like, cool, that homoeroticism.
Yes, I shall go and write an entire 500k fic about this one moment in which they say the name at the same time. And there goes my mic.
Your mic was like ACAB.
Yeah, it's like, oh no, I'm sorry. I apologize, microphone. But yeah, it's really weird, like how such a book and a musical can resonate like across so long, and that that you can find so many aspects of it too, to either criticize or enjoy, or look at a musical and be like, this was a very brief moment, but it's become such a bigger thing. And you're like,
there's a French filmmaker who just made an adaptation in 2019. It's called Les Misérables.
Really interesting.
It's
where did they get the title from?
Yeah, it's weird. But he is a Black French filmmaker, and he set it in 21st century France, especially in a banlieue of Black and Arab immigrants. And it's about the cops coming into this area and terrorizing them. And in an interview, largely was like, it won't surprise me if another adaptation of Les Mis comes out in the next 5 years, because anyone who is oppressed will find similarities with their own life in the novel. And it really has become this thing where, like, in Bread and Barricades, which is the Les Mis podcast that I do, we're reading through it, and like every single week something. Like there was one chapter, so the queen just died a couple months ago, and the king took over, and because of that, like loads of trains got cancelled. People weren't allowed to be buried because morgues were closing, hospitals were closing, streets were closing. Basically, if you were a citizen in the United Kingdom, you had to pay attention to the king. And in that chapter that we were reading that week, Jean Valjean is like trying to take Cosette to the park, and they come across this chain gang, and Cosette is suddenly like they're both taken aback by it. Jean Valjean is like, oh God, like Cosette is seeing what I could be.
Yeah.
She's going to find out who I am. And he basically has PTSD and like,
I mean, it's Jean Valjean. He's like every corner means his past is coming up behind him. So
yes. And Cosette sees these like people who are being treated really like terribly, and she's like, oh God, they're horrific. Like, this is so terrible. And the only reason that they met is because at that time the king was doing a procession down the road that these prisoners usually would be taken. And so everything got diverted, all the roads got changed, so that these prisoners and enslaved prisoners had to walk down a nice boulevard. And it was like reading that chapter in 2022 when the British king was like making plebeians like do whatever he wanted by just closing whatever he wanted, and like the whole system. And I was just like, oh God, like we're still in the 19th century. We've got poverty, unreal. Yeah, sorry, this is just politics now. I'm just so mad that like, the preface to Les Mis is for as long as injustice and social inequality still affects women, children, and the oppressed men, this book will continue to be relevant. It's like, yeah, it is. Yeah. It still is.
Way to Victor Hugo. Who would have thought like this was the one that would cycle through so many like iterations of history that that you can see so much of the world still baked into Les Mis, because I mean the student revolutions, just the uprising of the French Revolution itself. I mean, because I know that within the book and the musical, it's not the big French Revolution that everybody knows. It's like one of the minor like student revolts that
June Rebellion.
Yeah, June Rebellion. So it's just like, because when people think that, they're like, oh, the guillotines and all that stuff, and it's like, the King Louis and let them eat cake and blah blah blah, which she never said. Telling you right now, she didn't say it. but yeah, to like be able to find that resonance still in this day is both a horrible thing, and also like from an academic standpoint, just kind of like, oh, this is just fuel. This is just fuel for the engine there, because it's still there and we're still talking about it, and it still means something. And that people can still get something out of this story that was written, 200 years ago.
Yeah. And like to kind of link multiple conversations, hopefully I'll be able to do this well.
We'll do. Okay, come on,
Nemo. As part of my PhD, I've been interviewing fans of color about their time in the Les Mis fandom. And there have been some really interesting interviews with fans from like Cuba and the Philippines. And there was one person that I was interviewing from the Philippines who said that, they really saw contemporary sex work in the Philippines, and Fontaine dies of disease in hospital, and tuberculosis is still something that people are still struggling against in the Philippines, and was like, it's really like not just relatable in like abstract like rebellion kind of way, but like in like the genuine actual things that we are facing right now in my country are the exact same things that a 19th century French woman was facing. And I asked everyone that I interviewed if they could make an adaptation, where would they set it? And there were some really interesting conversations about that, because like we were talking about earlier, with the idea of not wanting to write down your history or not having your history written down, a lot of them were like, I know more about French rebellion, French rebellions and the history of 19th century France and America than I do know about my own country's rebellions and history. So even if I wanted to set it in 19th century, I'm trying to think of a country of someone that I didn't interview, so I'm making it fictionalized. Mozambique.
There we go.
Even if I wanted to set it in 19th century Mozambique, I wouldn't be able to, because like our education system doesn't allow us to understand that history. Again, I pulled Mozambique out of my ass, so I don't actually know anything about, but you know, you get my drift. Or South Africa or something like that, where you just like we are perpetuating what people are wanting to create or able to create stories about, I guess. And people were saying that, you know, they felt more comfortable writing fan fiction of Les Mis characters in an American high school or a French cafe, or even in like the southern France in 1850, because there is more written history about these things than there is about their own country. And I was just like, wow,
yeah,
what a concept. And like, it's still like, you know, I'm blown away by it, because I know that that's the truth, and I know that like for some people that's different, but even access to archives is not the same, you know, because I'm very lucky. I can walk into the British Library at any time. It's about 45 minutes away from my house, and I can get access to any book ever,
any
written
book
down.
My God.
Any book. And I can go on the internet and I can search for things, and for the most part can find anything on archive.org. And it's just such a privilege to be able to do that. And it's a privilege because being British means that we took all the books and put them in one building. And we built an archive, and we were like, hell yeah, this is where everything's going to be now, and that's ours. And so I can write Trice Forgotten, and because I can go into the British Library. Whereas if I say did live in the Philippines or Mozambique, I probably wouldn't be able to write the same kind of story, because I wouldn't have access to the same books. It's just like so cycle repeating itself.
The cyclical nature of like privilege and guilt, and like more privilege and more guilt, and
and like trying to use what I can to educate people. And like, you know, I've been in situations where I've been talking to people and like being like, oh, I've been trying to teach myself more about your country's history, and they're like, oh, well, if you know anything, let me know, because I haven't been taught anything. I'm like, God, oh God.
It's the nature of the beast. And you know, I think it was one of the things that you were talking about in the below decks with for the decolonizing the museum, is that one of the things with it is that we can't fully decolonize because it's so wrapped up in itself that to do that could also be doing some harm in the long run. And then you're just like, well, crap, now what do we do?
Unfortunately, we just have to keep on working.
Like, we want to burn down the system, but we also have to work within the system to burn it down slightly. But then it's only kind of minorly singed, and then you're just like, well, this kill it with fire strategy is not going as well as I thought it would.
Controlled fires make the forest land arid. Is that the word?
I mean, if we want to go with like the whole like 19th century novel symbolism, the fire burns to cleanse, but it's destruction and creation.
Sure.
Okay, let's work in a world of symbolism. That seems to work out well for us.
That's fine. We're humanity. I'm a humanities student. Like, that's what I
that's all it was. I think that's a good note to go out on.
Yeah, sure. As with everything, I'm like, burn it down. But wait, hold on.
That's my go-to strategy. Even as an archivist, my friends are like, "Do you think burning it down is a really good idea?" And I'm like, probably. At the very least, it's just not there anymore, and then I don't have to deal with it.
But then, you know, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, they tried to burn it down, but there was a chart that I saw the other day that was like, pretty much every family that was rich before the Chinese Cultural Revolution is rich now.
Yep.
And it's like, great. So even burning it down doesn't work. So unfortunately,
we have to burn it more. The harder thing. More kerosene. Look, I'm not abandoning this strategy. It will work out for me someday.
Yeah.
That's why my favorite Batman villain is Firefly. All he wants to do is burn it all down.
Yes, I am notorious as someone who likes burning things, so I am with you there.
Firebugs and pyros unite. Well, Nemo, I am so happy that we could do this, and that you are a guest on my show, and thank you for coming. And
it's been amazing to talk with you. You ask good questions, and I love talking about things. So
I love being validated with my good questions. So before we go, then, where might people find you in this unstable world of online culture?
Yeah, that's true. Well, since you kindly brought it up, if you do like Les Mis or you don't like Les Mis and you're interested in Les Mis, you can find
if you're
out
indifferent
more.
to Les Mis and
yeah. If you just like the sound of my voice, there's 100 episodes now of Bread and Barricades, a Les Mis podcast, so you can find that anywhere. Or if you want to find me, I am on Twitter for now, as it's burning down, at Zeus-Japonicus, and on Tumblr on the same username. And it's hard to spell, so you can just type in Nemo Martin and I'll come up.
And you should also all listen to Trice Forgotten.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
You came on here to talk about it, but we're just not even going to bother.
Yeah, that thing. Yeah.
Whatever.
And if you do like it, you should also send me the Cass going to Super Hell GIF, and I'll just get really mixed messages of people being like
just everyone send Nemo the Cass going to Super Hell GIF, and we'll just see what happens with that.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
And but yeah, if people desire to find me or continue listening to my voice, you can go to the Pop Archives website, which is poparchives.com, and there's a dash between pop and archives. I used to spell it out, but now it's just like you'll figure it out. It's fine. You can also go to this channel where you might like and subscribe to it, should you so desire. If you like to leave a comment on a property that I haven't talked about yet that involves archives or something to that effect, I can wing my way through it if I want to. Or I'll do extensive research, because that's just the way my brain will work. I'll watch everything and I'll read everything. Because I have so much time.
Yeah, it's possible for one person to know every piece of information in the world.
Yeah. I believe that. There are plenty of things where women are actually are the archives because it's like contained within their body, which is a trope that I need to get into at some point and actually write about it, because it infuriates me. You know how, okay, just real brief. There is a anime called The Mystic Archives of Dantalion. And yeah, I watched it with Spanish subtitles because I couldn't find English subs or a dub, so I had to translate some stuff for myself in Spanish.
That's the way to watch anime. That's the purest form.
The purest form of anime. But in order to get the knowledge that this dude desires, he has to reach into the chest of a prepubescent girl.
Of course.
Yep. That's a thing I'm going to talk about at some point.
Yeah,
pending episode. But anyway, you can come to this channel and talk about that if you want, or subscribe. Also follow me on Twitter while it's still available at darling_Sammy, SAMMY. Yeah, Nemo, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And yeah, bye everyone.